Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. And today we are going to talk about a book with a very long subtitle. I don't want you to forget any of the words. The head title is The Siege of Mecca. The subtitle, The Forgotten Uprising in Islam's Holiest Shrine and the Birth of Al-Qaeda. The author is Yaroslav Trofimov, and it is published by Doubleday, and Mr. Trofimov has been good enough to stop by. Thank you for doing that.
Great to be in the show.
I read this book, and the word that kept coming into my mind is one word to describe this book: amazing. It's amazing in so many ways. It's amazing in a sense to begin with on the difficulty that you had in doing the research. In a note to readers, you say, this book is a work of nonfiction and attempts to reconstruct as faithfully as possible the battle for Mecca and for the soul of Islam in 1979. The subject remains highly sensitive in Saudi Arabia, the government of which allows no access to its archives and discourages research on this topic. Many aspects of this crisis also remain classified in Western archives. My question to you is, why did you give up then and there?
Well, really, this was a very important topic to research. This was a pivotal moment in the history of the modern Muslim world, the world in general, and so little is known about it. Back in 1979, when this holiest shrine of Islam was occupied by a band of Islamic radicals who took 100,000 hostages inside.
How many?
Almost 100,000 hostages
my
inside
word.
this enormous stadium-like enclosure. Saudi Arabia cut off phone line links to the entire world, and for 24 hours, nobody even knew that such an enormous event had occurred. And it's really very embarrassing for the royal family, because the royal family in Saudi Arabia derives its legitimacy from being the custodians of the holy shrines, and there they lost them for 2 weeks of long, bloody battle to the rebels who occupied the mosque. And interestingly, the very people who run Saudi Arabia today, King Abdullah, the Crown Prince Sultan, were in charge at the time. Abdullah was the head of the National Guard. Sultan, now and then, was the defense minister. And the current foreign and interior ministers of Saudi Arabia held the very same jobs back then. So for them, it's not history.
The people with the footprints on this are still there.
They're all still there, all the same jobs. So for them, it's not history. For them, it's very, very current event.
Now, one of the interesting things, to me also amazing, and maybe I shouldn't say that, but was that for them to go in and quell this, the first thing they had to do was gather with theologians, which, those of us in this side of the world don't understand that. Well, what's going on?
Well, according to Islamic scriptures, it's forbidden to use weapons in this holy enclosure. Even the bird cannot be harmed, which is why there are so many pigeons flying around the Grand Mosque, which find this refuge just there. And so when the Saudi government sent troops to try to recapture the mosque and free the hostages, the troops refused to fight. They wouldn't even point weapons towards the Grand Mosque, saying it says in the Holy Scriptures we cannot do that. So the government had to secure a fatwa, a religious decree, from the 30 leading religious Islamic scholars of Saudi Arabia. And to do that, they really had to promise to embrace much of the radical ideology that drove the rebels in the first place.
Yeah, that was the irony of the whole thing. In order for them to get what they wanted, they had to say, yeah, what they're in there protesting, they're right. There shouldn't be pictures, there shouldn't be television, there shouldn't be this, there shouldn't be that. And having secured that agreement, then they finally said, okay, send in the guns.
Well, prior to 1979, Saudi Arabia was slowly but surely modernizing. Women were on television as newscasters. The prohibition on alcohol was relaxed. And really, the country was slowly entering the modern age, which is something to which both Juhayman al-Utaybi, the leader of the rebels in the Grand Mosque, and the leading clerics objected quite violently. So, in this historical trade-off, once the mosque was recaptured and once the clerics gave their assent to a big military operation to storm it using armored personnel carriers, artillery, aviation, it was really a real battle.
Yeah, you talk in the book about the track marks still being on the floor.
Yeah, exactly. And a large part of the structure was actually destroyed during that operation. And so once that assent from the clerics had been secured, the government moved very quickly to take the women off television, to enforce laws against alcohol, and very importantly, to start funding this global missionary network of Wahhabi proselytization, if you will, by the Saudi clerics. The network that spawned this new generation that would become recruits for Al Qaeda in following decades.
Well, it is really an incredible event. It is incredible that we know so little about it, and we're really in your debt. There's so much amazing about the Siege of Mecca, but the real question I suppose you might be asking out there, does all of this have any meaning for us? We'll try to find out when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
The Siege of Mecca, the Forgotten Uprising in Islam's holiest shrine, and the birth of Al Qaeda. That's the book today. The author is Yaroslav Trofimov, and it is published by Doubleday. And a gentleman by the name of Rajiv, and you will say the last name because I can't get it.
Rajiv Chandrasekaran.
See that? That's why I didn't try to say that. Who is this fellow? Well, he's the author of Imperial Life in the Emerald City inside Iraq's Green Zone. And you know him as a fellow journalist?
He works with the Washington Post, and this book that he had written was the bestseller last year.
Okay. Yaroslav Trofimov has written a spellbinding thriller. And that's one of the most amazing aspects of this book, that though this is very much nonfiction, there is a thriller aspect to it. Packed with vivid, previously undisclosed details, it illuminates a little-known hostage crisis in the closed-off heart of the Muslim world that helped give rise to Al-Qaeda. Once I started reading, I couldn't put the book down. And he's right. He's right. This is fascinating stuff. All right. What I really want to talk about now, I suppose, is how the hostage crisis in this closed-off place helped give rise to what we're dealing with today, Al-Qaeda. And I think we should begin with a fellow by the name of Juhayman. And his last name, or his other name, Juhayman
al-Utaibi, and he was really the leader of the uprising. He was a former corporal in the Saudi National Guard.
Which reminded me of a sergeant. Never mind. Corporal in the National Guard. All right.
And he came from a Bedouin background of this very religious Bedouins living in the desert, and the National Guard was a Bedouin corps. So he managed to recruit many of his fellow comrades, all the way up to the rank of colonel, into the organization. And once he left the force, he was very active in the missionary movement that was subsidized and promoted by the religious authority in Saudi Arabia to try to purify the Islam in the country and to enforce religious observance. So many of his followers were young students, not just Saudis, but also Americans. There were African-American converts who were at the time studying in Saudi Arabia.
Right.
There were Egyptians. There were people from really all over the world. So in a way, this was the very first global jihadi organization that would become a prototype for Al-Qaeda in the future. Now, once he entered the mosque and once the siege began, Osama bin Laden was living next door in Jeddah, and he was following it very carefully because the mosque had been constructed by the Bin Laden company, which was owned by Osama bin Laden's father, and rebels had some support within the company. They managed to sneak in 3 truckloads of weapons into the basement of the mosque.
Let's step back a minute.
Yeah.
Was this gentleman really a big figure before this event? I mean, was he the only one running around preaching this kind of, or this approach to the religion? Was he well publicized?
He was part of a broader movement that shared the ideology. But he led a subsection of that movement that really believed that the new Muslim Messiah is coming, that organized this very complicated military operation, if you will, to take over the mosque, to prepare the defenses, to put sniper nests on all the minarets. So he was a very charismatic figure, and his followers were so enthralled by him that hundreds of them had dreams, very vivid dreams, foreseeing this occupation and taking them as a sign of God, commanding them to go to the mosque and to take it over, therefore precipitating the coming of the Messiah and the end of days.
One of the fascinating parts about it was how they got the stuff that they needed, to take over the mosque and kill people, into the place in the first instance. They found a gate because of their connection with the Bin Laden family that a lot of people didn't know was there, and they got trucks and cars in, which are not allowed.
There are two ways. One way was to bring in weapons inside coffins, because according to Muslim traditions, dead people are brought to the mosque for the final blessings that would ensure them a place in paradise. And so a lot of the weaponry was smuggled in coffins, but three truckloads were driven into the basement of the mosque through this opening maintained by the Bin Laden company. And obviously this meant that there were sympathizers within the Bin Laden organization who helped Juhayman's rebels take over the mosque. Now, Bin Laden himself was not part of that group, but he was so deeply scarred and shocked by how the Saudi government behaved during the siege that his allegiance to the royal family fractured at this point.
Yeah, he wanted, well, I know whether he wanted, but at that point he was loyal to the family. And he had, however, sympathy for the rebel cause. I suppose for the religious aspects of it?
Yes, and also he was outraged with how the Saudi government defiled, in his word, the mosque by using military force to retake it.
What else could they do? The Siege of Mecca tells a powerful story. Does it have any lessons for us today? We're going to look into that question when we return.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster. It is Conversations on the Coast, the book, The Siege of Mecca, the Forgotten Uprising in Islam's Holiest Shrine, and the Birth of Al-Qaeda. The author, Yaroslav Trofimov, publisher, is Double J, and a gentleman by the name of Tom Bissell, who wrote a book called God Lives in St. Petersburg, says this about the book. As Yaroslav Trofimov amply and skillfully demonstrates, the most radioactive particle in the world today is not North Korea, Iran, or for that matter, the United States. It is rather the terrifying bundle of contradictions otherwise known as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the most formative event in the modern history of the secretive and at times morally disgusting petrocracy. What's a petrocracy?
Well, oil is the source of their power.
Petrocracy is vivisected by Trofimov to unsettling effect, and it reminds us of why anything that has happened or will happen there is a matter of great concern to the world. Well, let's go back to what happened there back in 1979. The radicals, if you will, are in there, and they've got all their guns, and the authorities are moving in hesitatingly. How did they finally get them out?
Well, after 2 weeks of battle in which the Saudis used American-made armored personnel carriers and suffered tremendous losses, finally they had to call in the help from abroad, and they turned to the French. The French sent a troop of special forces officers, and also they supplied a plain lot of poison gas.
Poison gas.
Poison gas. It was extra pure CS fine powder, which is lethal in confined spaces. So that gas was used to flush the rebels out from the basement of the mosque, which is a warren of more than 1,000 rooms, a true labyrinth, in which they had taken refuge in the last week of the siege. So the French supplied the gas, they trained the Saudis, and that was really used in order to secure the mosque.
What was the body count like?
The official Saudi numbers speak about hundreds of casualties, but most people who were there at the time estimate that the real death toll is in the thousands, especially because many of the pilgrims caught in the crossfire coming from India, Nigeria, Indonesia, they were never accounted for.
Yeah. collateral damage, we call it in this country. Now, I want to get back for a minute to the difficulties of research that you encountered and lived with to write this book. Somewhere in there, you mentioned the name of your best source, a gentleman, I think, a man, by the name of Samir, who was a former rebel. Now, he was your best source, and yet it's a pseudonym. He needs still to be protected?
Well, absolutely. Almost all the adult rebels who were captured in the mosque were either beheaded in public or were killed in secret in following month. So
there's a very gory paragraph in the book about how the biggies among those brought out were beheaded and done simultaneously in 5 cities or so.
Mm-hmm.
And then the heads are sewed back on for burial.
Yeah, this is the tradition there.
Okay.
So
he's still in danger.
The only real witnesses that I could find among the rebels who were in the mosque, who could tell the story from the inside of the shrine, were the men who were at the time were 15 or 16 years of age and were therefore spared the executioner's sword.
I see.
They spent a long time in jail, and they're still very much scared of talking to a foreigner because the issue is still a taboo issue in Saudi Arabia. So this man, Samir, would only meet me inside my hotel room. He was too scared to be seen with me in the lobby. And he spent the whole night emptying my non-alcoholic minibar of its contents.
Non-alcoholic, you say that. I'm buying it. I'm buying it.
It's Saudi Arabia, unfortunately.
Yeah, sure.
And really recounting in graphic details what happened. But he's by no means the only source. I spoke to many people who were inside the mosque at the time.
Do you consider him a friend?
Oh, no.
At this point?
He's not repentant at all. And considering that he had 2 older brothers who were in the mosque and who were killed by the government afterwards, his father committed suicide. So, he's still very much, on the rebel side.
Yeah, okay. Let's go back to what Tom Bissell says here, that the most radioactive particle in the world today is the terrifying bundle of contradictions, otherwise known as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, Saudi Arabia is really a font of many dangers. Al-Qaeda's ideology came from there. And now, as we're so focused on Iran and the threat posed by Iran, all of a sudden there is this tendency to forgive and forget and embrace Saudi Arabia again, which really was a danger that manifested itself back in 1979, because when the mosque was occupied, the U.S. was focused on Iran. Yeah. The American embassy had been overrun. And so the U.S. blamed the Iranians for this attack. The response was that the Iranians, in turn, blamed the U.S. American embassies burned all over the Muslim world as a result. And the Carter administration really blinked and couldn't understand what was going on in Saudi Arabia.
Okay, there's your advice. You people in Washington, watch out for the Saudis. You people out there listening to the program, you want to read a great book. That's amazing. That's thrilling. It's called The Siege of Mecca. The author is Yaroslav Trofimov. And this has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.